Imagine this for a moment. You and your closest friends plan a simple weekend trip. Just a quick escape from the city to breathe fresh mountain air, take a few photos, grill some food by the fire, and share stories under the stars. You pack your bag with only the essentials, never once thinking that this might be the last time you see your family. The last time you see the familiar world outside. That is exactly what happened to 5 friends on a September evening. They left Seattle full of excitement, driving toward North Cascades National Park in Washington, a place known for its breathtaking views and endless trails hidden in mountain mist. They left behind the glow of city lights and entered the vast wilderness with hearts filled with anticipation, ready for a short but unforgettable adventure. But they never came back. Their car was still there, parked quietly by the trailhead leading into the woods, standing as silent proof that they had once arrived. But as for the people themselves, nothing. No trace, no answers, only a gaping silence, as if the forest had swallowed them whole. 5 long years passed. Families and friends of the missing clung desperately to fragile hope, torn between believing and grieving. Search teams, rescue dogs, even helicopters scoured the terrain, yet the wilderness refused to give up its secret. It was as though nature itself had locked away the truth, burying it deep beneath the canopy of trees. And then, when it seemed the case would fade into forgotten memory, a drone flying over the forbidden woods captured something no one could have expected. A shaky, blurry image, yet terrifying enough to send chills through everyone who saw it. What that drone revealed has left behind an unsettling truth, one that continues to haunt us even now. It was the evening of the 12th of September, 2016, when the 5 friends, Caleb, Mia, Harlow, Jenna, and Ryan, loaded their backpacks into Caleb's SUV. The city of Seattle was still alive, with its usual hum, but the group had their eyes set on a different kind of energy. The quiet pulse of the mountains, the hush of tall evergreens, the winding trails that promised freedom. To them, this was supposed to be just another trip, one of many they had shared together since college. They left around 7:45 p.m., a little later than planned, laughing about who had taken too long to pack. The late summer air was cool, tinged with the promise of fall. As they drove north, headlights slicing through the darkening highway, their conversation drifted between jokes, memories, and plans for the weekend ahead. No one in that car could have imagined that every mile they drove was carrying them closer to the edge of a mystery that would outlast them all. By 10:15 p.m., their vehicle was seen pulling off into a small gravel lot near one of the lesser-known trailheads of North Cascades National Park. It was a spot they had chosen deliberately far from the tourist crowds, deep enough into the wilderness to feel like they had it all to themselves. Caleb, always the careful one, locked the car and tucked the keys into his jacket. Harlow grabbed the cooler, Jenna slung her camera over her shoulder, and Mia laughed as Ryan teased her about overpacking. To anyone watching, it would have looked like nothing more than a group of friends beginning a weekend adventure. But that was the last time anyone ever saw them. The next morning, when the sun rose over the Cascades, their campsite was never set up, no tent staked into the earth, no remnants of a fire pit, no scattered gear. It was as though the forest itself had erased their presence overnight. When the group didn't return by Monday as expected, their families weren't immediately alarmed. It wasn't unusual for them to lose cell service in the mountains, and sometimes they extended their trips an extra night. But by Tuesday evening, worry began to spread. Phone calls went unanswered. Social media accounts sat silent. By Wednesday, the alarm was undeniable. Something was wrong. Authorities were notified, and by Thursday morning, rangers hiked the trail where their car was found. The vehicle was still parked neatly in the gravel lot, locked, with no sign of tampering. Inside were small items left behind: an empty coffee cup, a folded park map, a phone charger. On the back seat lay Jenna's denim jacket, neatly folded as though she'd meant to grab it later. But the people were gone. Search teams moved quickly. Helicopters circled overhead, their blades chopping the air while spotters scanned the endless sea of green below. Volunteers combed the trails in long lines, calling out their names into the heavy silence of the forest. Rescue dogs sniffed along ridges and streams, sometimes pausing at faint scents that led nowhere. For days, the woods echoed with human voices, but the five friends never answered. The most unsettling part was the absence of anything at all. Usually, in cases of missing hikers, there are breadcrumbs, a dropped water bottle, a torn piece of fabric caught on a branch, tracks pressed into the soil. Here, there was nothing. No trails leading deeper in, no signs of struggle, no clues to suggest which direction they had gone. It was as if they had stepped off the map entirely. For the families, each hour, without answers, was torture. Caleb's parents drove up from Oregon and sat near the trailhead, staring at their son's car as though it might somehow explain what had happened. Mia's younger brother paced the gravel lot, kicking at stones, unable to comprehend how someone could simply vanish. Ryan's mother whispered prayers under her breath, while Harlow's sister pinned flyers to trees and ranger stations. The search lasted for weeks. Each new day brought exhaustion and disappointment. As the leaves began to turn and the first hints of snow appeared on the ridges, the official rescue mission was scaled back. The forest had swallowed the five friends, and no one could say how or why. But deep down, in the heavy quiet of the Cascades, the answer was still there, hidden. It would remain buried for 5 long years, until the unblinking eye of a drone revealed something no one had been able to see. In the days that followed their disappearance, the quiet beauty of North Cascades National Park was transformed into a vast search zone. What had been a place of trails, waterfalls, and hidden valleys became a labyrinth filled with urgency, fear, and unanswered questions. The first teams to arrive were park rangers and local deputies. They moved carefully through the dense undergrowth, marking trees with tape to keep from doubling back on themselves. Their calls echoed into the silence. Caleb, Mia, Harlow, Jenna, Ryan. Each name was swallowed whole by the forest, carried away by the wind until nothing remained but the drone of insects and the rustle of leaves. By the third day, the search expanded dramatically. Helicopters circled above, their spotlights cutting through the thick canopy in long, bright sweeps. From the air, the forest looked endless, a green ocean stretching in every direction. But the eyes peering down from the helicopters saw nothing. No flashes of bright clothing, no signs of movement. Just the same relentless pattern of trees. On the ground, rescue dogs were brought in, their noses pressed low to the earth as handlers guided them along ridges, creeks, and deer paths. Sometimes the dogs would stop abruptly, pawing at the soil or tilting their heads as if catching the faintest trace of human scent. But each time, the trail would fade, and the handlers would exchange uneasy glances. It was as if the five friends had walked into the forest and simply dissolved into the air. The families clung to hope as best they could. Flyers were printed, their faces smiling from photocopied pages tacked to trail signs, gas stations, and ranger posts. Volunteers arrived by the dozens, some seasoned hikers who knew the backcountry well, others simply locals who couldn't stand to watch the story unfold without helping. Together, they formed search lines, sweeping valleys and hillsides in grids, careful not to leave a single patch of ground unexamined. Still, nothing. No broken branches suggesting a fall, no scraps of clothing caught on brambles, no dropped gear. Even the most experienced rescuers began to murmur about how unusual it was. People left traces always, but here, the woods kept its silence. As the days turned into weeks, frustration began to mount. Whispers of theories spread quietly among the volunteers. Some believed the group must have taken a wrong turn and wandered far beyond the established trails, deeper into the unforgiving backcountry. Others feared an accident, a sudden storm, a fall into a ravine, an encounter with a wild animal. And then there were the darker speculations: foul play, or something far stranger lurking within the forest. But no theory explained the absence of evidence. Caleb's father stayed near the trailhead every day, sitting on a folding chair beside the parked SUV, refusing to leave. He told reporters that he felt his son might return at any moment, that he couldn't bear the thought of his child walking out of the trees to find no one waiting. Mia's mother stood at the ranger station, handing out bottled water and sandwiches to exhausted searchers, quietly thanking each one, her eyes swollen from sleepless nights. The official operation stretched nearly a month, covering miles of rugged terrain, rivers, and ridgelines. The cost in manpower and resources was immense, yet the forest gave nothing back. Finally, with the first signs of winter settling over the Cascades, the authorities made the painful decision to scale back. The families were devastated. For them, stopping the search felt like betrayal, like abandoning the five to the cold silence of the mountains. Unofficial efforts continued for months afterward. Independent hikers, amateur sleuths, and even psychics came forward, each convinced they could uncover what others had missed. Some scoured old logging roads, others dove into icy lakes, but just like the official teams, they all came back empty-handed. By spring, the case was no longer front-page news. Other stories pushed it aside, and the world moved on. But for the families, the waiting never ended. Every time a phone rang late at night, every time an unfamiliar number appeared on their screens, they felt a jolt of hope that maybe, just maybe, one of the five had been found. That hope, however fragile, would sustain them through the years of silence that followed. For 5 long years, the mystery of the vanished friends lingered, heavy as mist over the Cascades, until the forest finally yielded a clue, not to searchers on the ground, but to the unblinking eye of a machine in the sky. The decision to scale back the official search marked the beginning of a different kind of torment for the families. The endless movement of rescue teams, the hum of helicopters, and the chatter of volunteers had at least provided the illusion of progress, of action. When that noise stopped, all that was left was silence. Weeks slipped into months. The leaves that had turned amber and red in the fall gave way to snow, blanketing the Cascades in a cruel stillness. By spring, hikers returned to the trails, but none reported seeing a trace of the missing. Their faces remained on posters, tacked to ranger stations, and pinned to bulletin boards in small towns, the paper slowly curling at the edges, faded by rain and Sunday. For the families, life became a cycle of waiting and wondering. Caleb's father, who had once sat by the trailhead every day, finally went home but kept his son's room exactly as it had been. The bed remained made, the closet untouched. Mia's mother left her phone on the nightstand every night, the volume turned up high, just in case her daughter called. Harlow's sister joined online forums where strangers traded theories and rumors, hoping someone might know something that the authorities had overlooked. Birthdays passed, holidays came and went, and each year the pain grew sharper. What do you say at Thanksgiving when one chair remains empty? How do you decorate a Christmas tree when the person who once strung the lights is no longer there? These were the questions that haunted the families, year after year. Meanwhile, rumors grew in the small communities near the park. Locals whispered about strange sounds in the woods, about a shadowed valley where people had always gone missing. Some swore the forest itself was cursed, that it had a hunger for those who wandered too deep. Others believed the five friends had stumbled upon something they were never meant to see. The official case file gathered dust. Detectives rotated to new assignments. Fresh tragedies claimed public attention. But every so often, an old ranger passing through the park would stop and stare at the trailhead, remembering the days when hundreds had scoured those ridges for a sign that never came. And yet, hope never completely died. Families organized small searches on anniversaries, lighting candles near the spot where the SUV had been found. They clung to the idea that maybe, somewhere out there, a clue still waited to be uncovered. That fragile hope endured for 5 long years, and then, on a clear summer afternoon, it happened. A drone operator, just an amateur filmmaker out to capture footage of the Cascades, sent his machine soaring high above the treetops. The drone dipped, banked, and swept over ridges rarely seen by human eyes. And as the camera fed images back to the operator's screen, something appeared, something out of place, something that made him freeze, staring in disbelief. For 5 years, the forest had kept its secret locked tight. But now, through the unblinking lens of a drone, it was finally ready to show the world what it had been hiding. On a bright July afternoon, 5 years to the month since the friends had disappeared, a hobbyist drone operator named Mark Travers drove out toward the northern boundary of North Cascades National Park. Mark wasn't a searcher, not a detective, not even someone particularly drawn to the mystery of the vanished group. He was simply a filmmaker, fascinated by the beauty of aerial footage. He had heard that the park offered sweeping vistas few people had ever captured on camera, and he wanted to be the one to frame it from above. He hiked a few miles up a seldom-used trail, unpacked his drone, and let it lift into the sky. The whir of the propellers faded as the machine rose, its camera tilting down to reveal the immense canopy of the Cascades. From above, the forest was an endless quilt of green, broken only by the jagged lines of ridges and the occasional glimmer of a creek. To most eyes, it looked serene. To Mark, it was breathtaking. But then, something caught his attention. As the drone banked over a dense valley, the camera picked up an odd patch of ground, a break in the uniform sea of trees. At first, he thought it was just a clearing, maybe the scar of an old logging operation. But zooming in, he noticed shapes that didn't belong, angles, edges, man-made lines that stood out against the chaos of nature. He guided the drone lower, heart pounding as the image sharpened. What he saw chilled him. Beneath the thick branches of cedar and fir lay the remnants of a campsite tattered fabric that might once have been tents, a metal frame half buried in moss, objects scattered in strange disarray. For 5 years, no ground team had stumbled upon this place, hidden deep in terrain too steep and tangled to reach easily. Yet here it was, silent and waiting, preserved by the forest until a machine had finally hovered overhead. Mark stared at his controller screen, hardly breathing. He could make out a flash of blue cloth, perhaps a jacket or a backpack, faded by sun and rain, but unmistakably human. A few feet away, a pale shape stretched along the ground. At first, he told himself it was a fallen log, bleached by weather. But as the drone hovered, the outline became too precise, too human. Shoulders, a skull, the unmistakable curve of a rib cage. His throat went dry. He pulled the drone back, then steadied himself and lowered it again, needing to be sure. More shapes appeared in the undergrowth, each one arranged as though frozen in the moment of collapse. They were not altogether scattered, instead, as if whatever had happened that night had driven them in different directions before the forest claimed them. Mark brought the drone home trembling, packed up his gear, and drove straight to the nearest ranger station. Within hours, authorities were poring over the footage, their expressions grim. The valley shown on the camera was remote, far-off established trails in a section of the park that most people avoided due to its steep ravines and unpredictable weather. It was exactly the kind of place one could get lost and never be found. When search teams returned to the forest, this time, guided by GPS coordinates from the drone, they struggled for hours just to reach the location. The valley was suffocatingly dense, with trees growing so close together that daylight barely reached the ground. But eventually, they broke through, and there it was, just as the footage had shown. The remnants of the campsite were unmistakable. A torn nylon tent collapsed inward, cookware rusted through, a backpack gnawed by animals. And near these relics lay what no one had wanted to find: human remains, scattered but eerily preserved in the stillness of the valley floor. 5 sets in total. Forensic teams carefully marked the site, their voices hushed, their movements slow. Even seasoned investigators admitted the scene carried a strange weight, as though the forest itself were watching, reluctant to surrender what it had held for so long. News of the discovery spread quickly. Families were notified, their years of waiting now answered in the cruelest way. The mystery of where the 5 friends had gone was finally solved, but the question of why remained as murky as ever. The drone had revealed the end of their journey, but not the story of how they had come to rest in that hidden valley. And that unanswered question was what haunted everyone who heard the news. The discovery of the campsite should have brought closure. In one sense, It did. The five friends were no longer lost, no longer floating in the agonizing limbo of missing. But the truth of their fate was far less clear. What had led them into that valley? Why had no one found them sooner? And most importantly, what had happened in those final hours? Investigators began with the most straightforward explanation: an accident. The terrain in that section of North Cascades is notorious steep ravines, sudden storms, and hidden cliffs. It was possible, they reasoned, that the group had strayed from the marked trail, either by curiosity or mistake, and wandered into the valley. Once there, perhaps one of them was injured. With night falling and temperatures dropping, panic could have set in. Maybe they tried to set up camp hastily, only to be overwhelmed by exposure, fatigue, or miscalculation. But something about that theory didn't sit well. If it were simply hypothermia or a fall, why had the campsite looked so chaotic? Why were the remains scattered, some at distances that suggested desperate movement? Other experts raised the possibility of wildlife. The Cascades are home to bears and mountain lions, predators capable of ambushing hikers. Perhaps the group had been attacked, their camp destroyed in the struggle. Yet the forensic team found no clear bite marks or evidence of predation. The remains had been disturbed, yes, but largely by years of weather and smaller animals, not by a violent encounter with something large. Then came the more unsettling theories. Some locals whispered that the five had been victims of foul play, that they had crossed paths with someone dangerous in the wilderness. The fact that their personal belongings were still there, however, made robbery seem unlikely. Others pointed out how unusual it was that even after the most extensive search in park history, nothing had been found. "It's like the forest swallowed them whole," one volunteer said. Among the families, the lack of answers only deepened the wound. Caleb's father refused to believe it was an accident. Mia's mother was convinced someone or something had forced them into that hidden valley. Ryan's mother clung to the idea that they had simply taken a wrong turn and gotten lost, but even she admitted the silence of the forest had always felt unnatural. For investigators, the mystery became less about what the drone had revealed and more about what it hadn't. There were no notes left behind, no electronic devices that had survived intact, no clear sign of direction. The forest had returned their bodies, but erased their story. And so, the case slipped into that gray place between fact and legend. Officially, the conclusion pointed to misadventure hikers lost in the wilderness, overtaken by the elements. But unofficially, the theories still churned. A sudden storm, a hidden crevasse, foul play, or something more elusive, something that even science could not frame. Whatever the truth, the unanswered questions remained like shadows in the trees. The drone had shown the world where they ended, but it had not explained the journey. And perhaps, in the depths of that valley, only the forest itself still knows. In the end, the discovery brought no peace, only more questions. For the families, closure was a word that rang hollow. They could lay their children to rest, yes, but how do you bury the unknown? Every night, they still dreamed of what those last hours might have been like. Five friends huddled together against the cold, whispering reassurances they didn't truly believe, waiting for a sunrise that never came. The forest, in its quiet indifference, had held their secret for 5 long years. Even now, after the remains had been retrieved and the headlines had faded, it seemed unwilling to release the full story. Travelers who passed near that hidden valley sometimes spoke of strange feelings, the sense of being watched, or the sound of faint laughter carried by the wind, only to vanish when they turned their heads. Rangers dismissed it as imagination, yet those who had searched in the early days knew the truth. There are places in the wild that do not easily let go of what they claim. In the towns nearby, the case became a cautionary tale. Parents warned their children not to stray from marked trails. Hikers spoke of the valley in hushed tones, as though to name it too loudly was to invite misfortune. The forest, vast and eternal, had earned a reputation not just as a place of beauty, but as a place that remembers. And so the story of 5 young lives became more than just a mystery. It became a shadow stitched into the fabric of the Cascades. People would recall their names, their faces, their laughter frozen in photographs, and wonder what they might have become had that trip been just another happy memory. Instead, they remain forever suspended in time, their voices silenced, their journey unfinished. Perhaps the most haunting truth of all is this: they set out seeking adventure, never imagining that their footsteps would end in silence. And while the world moves forward, the forest holds their final moments close, like secrets whispered into the wind. Some mysteries are never solved. Some stories are never fully told. And in the wilderness, where beauty and danger walk hand in hand, the line between life and disappearance is thinner than we dare believe. If this story gave you chills, don't forget to subscribe to Last Seen for more haunting disappearances and unsolved mysteries. Your support helps us bring these stories to light and keep the memory of the lost alive. Share this video with someone who loves the unknown, and let us know in the comments what you think really happened that night.